We moved to a new town when I was 6. Any memories before that move I consider to be very early childhood, and a lot of those memories are blurry at this point. This is one of those memories. This happened at some age before 6. If I had to guess, I was 5. There was the local town library that our mom would always take my brothers and me to. It was a few blocks away. Actually, I remember this one day. It was my mom and my little brother, who was a toddler at this point. We started the day at the mall, probably spent hours there tagging along with our mom shopping. Whenever we'd go to this mall, she'd always bring us to the inside the mall to get us ice cream cones. I remember we got ice cream on this particular day because on the way to the library after leaving the mall, I still had some of the cone left in my hand. We arrived at the library, and there was this kids' computer section that my mom would let me stay at and play computer games while she went and did whatever she'd do. When I got bored of playing whatever old online computer games there were at the time, I got up and started walking through the aisles of books in the kids section of the library, looking for the books. The kids section was in the far corner of the library, and while I was walking from aisle to aisle, I heard a peep from behind me. I turned around and saw nothing. I was looking at the back wall of the library, which had another shelf of books leaning on it. Then I saw half of a grown man's face peer around the shelf and say, "Peekaboo." I remember laughing and feeling no sense of danger. He did it again. He went back behind the shelf, then peered out his head again and said, "Peekaboo," again. I laughed. He asked me what I was looking for, and I said the books. He said he'd help me find them. He came over and took my hand and started leading me through the aisles, leading us, I guess, to the section of books that began with the letter I. And there they were, at least 5 I Spy books next to each other. I grabbed my favorite one, the treasure hunt one, and he said, "Let's go sit down and play." He led me to a table in the corner by a couple of children's computers, and we started looking through the pictures. This went on for some time, and he was asking me questions about myself as we played I Spy. The question that still sticks out to me the most is, "Who are you here with?" And I told him, "My mom and little brother." At some point after this, he said something implying that there's a kids' playroom downstairs. I, at that age, never knew that there was a downstairs to the library. He said we could take the book down there. He led me to the door that led to the basement of the library, which, for reference, is actually where events and meetings for certain clubs and organizations are held, and there is actually a little playroom down there, I guess for parents who have to bring their kids with them during any of the meetings. The man led me to that little playroom. There were various toys in there, most notably a Lego set and a Lego table, and then there were a bunch of chairs. He set the I Spy book down on the Lego table. This is where things get really uncomfortable thinking back on it, as he was trying to forcibly get me to play with the toys. I started to get uncomfortable, and around this time, over the loudspeaker, a female librarian said into the intercom, "Will John come to the front, please? Your mother is looking for you." At this time, the man went to turn off the lights in the room, and now it was pitch black inside. He said in the dark, "We're going to play hide and seek." This was the first moment I was genuinely freaked out, and I started to yell for my mom. I remember he kept telling me to be quiet, and his voice was getting louder as he was getting closer to me in the dark until he had his hands on me. I thankfully managed to run past him and out the door of that room. I ran down the dark hallway back to the stairs. As I was running up the stairs, I had that same childhood feeling of running up the basement stairs after turning off the lights, only 100 times worse because I genuinely was scared I was going to be grabbed. I made it back to the main floor of the library and ran straight to the front desk, calling for my mom. She was at the front desk with a group of librarians, and I remember the relief on my mom's face when she saw me. I told her there was some man who took me downstairs, and she literally lost it. The next thing I remember from there was a bunch of police in the building searching around, but I never saw that man again. He must have exited the building through a different way. I remember speaking to some woman who was probably with the police, asking me very delicate questions. I never really asked my mom about this experience that many times because it's very uncomfortable, and I'd rather just not think of it. I always considered myself an ordinary student studying at a small college in the town. I spent most of my time in the library. This place was always a quiet haven where I could escape from daily problems and immerse myself in books. But one night, everything changed. It was a Wednesday, and I was preparing for an important history exam. The library, as usual, was almost empty. Only a few students wandered between the shelves, and the librarian, Mrs. Lilly, sat at her desk absorbed in some old book. I chose a spot in the far corner of the library, where it was usually the quietest. Hours flew by, and I didn't even notice how closing time approached. Mrs. Lilly announced that the library would close in 10 minutes. I gathered my things and was ready to leave when I remembered that I had left my notes in the reading room on the second floor. In a hurry, I went up there, but when I returned, the entrance doors were already closed. Panic started to rise in me, but I decided that the best option was to find Mrs. Lilly and ask her to open the door. I began searching for her throughout the library, but she had disappeared. No trace, only silence and the dim light from the old lamps. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound. It was the creak of a door in the old part of the library, which was closed to visitors. I decided to check, thinking that perhaps Mrs. Lilly was there. Approaching closer, I noticed that the door was slightly open. I went inside and saw long rows of old bookshelves covered in dust. The air here was heavy and suffocating. My heart started pounding faster when I realized I heard footsteps behind me. I quickly turned around but saw no one. Maybe it was just the wind, I thought, but the feeling of unease didn't leave me. I decided to go further, hoping to find an exit. As I walked between the shelves, I heard the footsteps again. Now they were closer. I stopped and turned around, but again saw no one. This was starting to scare me. Suddenly, I heard a whisper. The words were indistinguishable, but they were clearly directed at me. I decided to find the source of the sound, no matter how scary it was. As I walked between the shelves, I saw light at the end of the corridor. Approaching closer, I saw an old storage room. The door was slightly open, and soft light poured from inside. I cautiously opened the door and peeked inside. On the floor sat a girl who looked like she had been there for many years. Her face was familiar. It was Mary, a student who disappeared last year. Her eyes were empty, and her hair was disheveled. "Mary?" I asked, not believing my eyes. She raised her head and looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Help me," she said quietly. I approached closer, trying to understand what had happened to her. She was holding an old book that looked very valuable. "What happened?" I asked, sitting down next to her. "I can't find the way out," she replied. "They won't let me go." "Who are they?" I asked, puzzled. She just looked at me with horror in her eyes and whispered, "The librarians." My heart started pounding faster. I didn't understand what she meant, but her fear was real. I decided we needed to act. We had to find a way out of here together. I helped Mary get up, and we started looking for an exit from this old part of the library. Several minutes passed when I realized we were constantly returning to the same place. The corridors seemed endless, and the shelves infinite. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us. Turning around, I saw a shadow moving between the shelves. We started running, trying to find an exit. The footsteps grew closer, and we got more and more entangled in the maze of books. Finally, we found a door leading to the first floor. Opening it, we found ourselves in a familiar part of the library, but here a new challenge awaited us. Mrs. Lily stood by the exit, looking at us with a cold gaze. "You shouldn't have gone into the old part of the library," she said. "We're just looking for an exit," I replied, trying to hide my fear. "The exit was always here," she said and opened the door. Mary and I quickly stepped outside, feeling the cold air engulf us. I turned to thank Mrs. Lily, but she was already gone. The library doors were closed, and silence reigned around us. After that night, I never returned to the library. Mary went missing again, and no one saw her anymore. I will always remember the horror I felt in the old part of the library. Sometimes at night, it seems I hear a whisper calling me back, but I know I will never cross that threshold again. This is something that happened a long time ago when I went to my local library. It was probably the year 2000. I remember that I was going there to get some educational books. The internet was around back then, but you couldn't quite just Google whatever you wanted to know like that. The more common method for me was to go to the library and check out books on the topic. So anyways, I drove down to the library, which was maybe 10 minutes from my house. I went inside, and it was a little bit later. I think they closed soon. I just know that I was about the only person inside. The library was somewhat large, and I made my way to the aisle of bookshelves where I was looking for. Then I began trying to find the best books to check out. I spent a few minutes looking at books and comparing. During this time, after a while, I heard someone approaching. The library had been especially quiet. Everybody knows libraries are usually very quiet, but with hardly anybody there, it was to another level. The footsteps sounded like they were about to enter the aisle that I was in. So naturally, I looked up. But when I did, I didn't see anybody at all. It was like they had stopped right before they reached the corner of my aisle. I thought that maybe it would be a librarian telling me that the library was closing soon or something, but no, nobody seemed to be there at all. I then went back to what I was doing. I was very focused on comparing the books because I wanted to get the best ones. Several more minutes went by. Then I remember casually looking up and glancing over to the end of the aisle. When I did, I suddenly noticed that there was a woman standing there. She was almost leaning around the corner and looking at me. This woman appeared to be a little bit younger, had blonde hair, but was wearing these strange-looking sunglasses, and she was looking right at me. I looked away because it was just really strange and focused my attention back down on the book that I was holding. But when I did, I realized just how strange this was. I also realized that this was likely the same person who I had heard approaching, but that was like 5 minutes ago. Had she been standing there this whole time? I looked back up again from the book and glanced in her direction. She was still staring at me and hadn't moved. I kept looking at her, surprised and confused. I didn't know what to say or do. Finally, as I was looking at her, she suddenly moved back very quickly and went out of my sight. I then walked over to the end of the bookshelf where she had been and looked out. I was wondering where she had gone, but I couldn't see her. She likely had gone to another aisle. That little situation was very strange. I then hurried up and finished selecting books. I picked out 3 different books and then headed to check them out. When I did not notice seeing the woman at all. I then checked out my books, left the library, and went home. Now, I had these books for about 3 weeks and then had to return them to the library. I remember that night I knew that I was going to be in the area, so I brought the books with me. The library had a drop box outside, sort of near the side of the building. You could just drop the books out there at any time of day. The library did not have to be open. So on the way home that night, probably around 10 p.m., I stopped by the library. I parked in the empty parking lot and walked up to the drop box with the books. Now, to the right of the library building, kind of near the drop box, there was a little park area. It was just a few picnic tables and a little open space of grass. Beyond that was a bit of a wooded area. When I reached the drop box and put the books inside, I noticed something. There was a person on the edge of the woods that seemed really weird. When I looked closer, I saw that this was a woman with strange sunglasses, the very same woman who had been staring at me in the library before. I was so creeped out that I instantly turned around and ran back to my car. I drove home and didn't go back to that library again for months. I did return, though, and never saw that woman again. I still don't know who she was or what she was doing. Bodleian Library stood as a beacon of knowledge in the small town of Oxford. However, its history was marred by tragedy and mystery. Legend had it that the library was built upon cursed ground where restless spirits roamed the earth seeking vengeance. One fateful night, Luna, a dedicated librarian, found herself alone in the library after hours. As she went about her duties, she heard faint whispers echoing through the empty halls. Brushing it off as her imagination, she continued her work until the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the books on the shelves began to fly off, pages fluttering in the air as if guided by an unseen force. Terrified, Luna fled to the safety of her office, only to find the doors sealed shut by an unknown presence. Panic gripped her as she realized she was trapped inside the library with something malevolent. Desperate for answers, Luna delved into the library's archives, uncovering the dark history of Bodleian. Centuries ago, the land upon which the library stood had been cursed by a vengeful witch, cursing all who dared to trespass upon it. Determined to break the curse and free herself from the library's grip, Luna embarked on a perilous journey through the hidden chambers and secret passages of Bodleian. Along the way, she encountered the spirits of those who had perished within its walls, their anguished cries echoing in the darkness. At the heart of the library, Luna discovered the source of the curse, a forgotten tome bound in human flesh, its pages teeming with dark magic. With trembling hands, she began to recite the incantations inscribed within, hoping to banish the curse once and for all. As the final words left her lips, a blinding light enveloped the library, and Luna felt a sense of peace wash over her. When she opened her eyes, she found herself standing outside Bodleian Library, the curse broken and the spirits laid to rest. From that day forth, the library stood as a symbol of resilience and triumph, a testament to the power of courage and determination in the face of darkness. When I was younger, I used to go to the library many times after school. This takes place when I was a freshman in high school. Back then, I did not have access to a computer with internet at home, so many times, when I was walking home from school, I would stop at the library. There was one that was roughly halfway back home from school and only a couple of blocks out of my way. I would do homework, play games on the internet, and go on Facebook and stuff. Most days, I would be there for a few hours and then walk the rest of the way back home. I went there on average maybe 2 or 3 times a week, but sometimes more or less. So, one day I went to the library after school and logged on to one of the computers. The library was pretty large, so large that it had 2 levels. Usually, there would be quite a few people there, but they were pretty spread out. I was on the computer and remember that I went on Facebook. When I did, I saw that I had a new friend request. It was from some random guy I didn't know. The profile picture was of a car, and I didn't recognize the name. But back then, I would automatically accept every friend request that I got. I didn't even care if I knew the person, so I accepted it and thought nothing more about it. Well, probably just about a minute after I accepted it, the guy sent me a message saying, "Hi." I responded back saying, "Hi," and was now wondering who he was. He responded, saying that he was in the library with me right now. This seemed kind of strange to me. I was not aware of knowing anybody at the library. I had never seen one of my friends from school there. The guy said that he was on the other side of the library and upstairs. I didn't really know what to think of it, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but the guy kept talking to me on Facebook. He soon started to ask me personal questions, so I decided to stop responding to him because he was coming across as a creep. I went on another internet tab and ignored it, but I kept seeing more notifications pop up that he was sending me more messages. This was really starting to creep me out, so I closed everything, logged off the computer, and then left. I had no idea who it was in the library. I walked straight home and hoped that I wouldn't encounter that man anymore. A couple of days later, I went back to the library again after school. Like most times, I found an open computer and logged on. I went on Facebook and saw several more messages from the guy. I didn't respond and just ignored them. He must have seen that I had logged on to Facebook. I know it shows other friends that are currently online. So he started sending me more messages. I didn't bother to look and continued to ignore him. Several minutes later, though, I suddenly felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked, and it was some guy I had never seen before. He was much older than me, had an uneven gray and brown beard, and was wearing a green hat. He then asked me why I wasn't responding to him. I was so surprised that I didn't say anything. The man then asked me to go with him. He said that he was leaving and motioned for me to get up. I said no to the man. He continued to stand there for about a minute before walking away. But the man only walked over towards the front of the library near the doors. I watched him sit down in a chair near the entrance and face me. I wanted to leave, but he was sitting right by the doors, and I would have to walk past him. He was just kind of watching me, and I felt like if I left, he would follow me or something. I stayed at the computer for a while. Every time I looked over towards the doors, I saw that the man was still there and often looking at me. I called my mom. Luckily, I had just recently gotten a cell phone. I told her about the situation and asked her to come and pick me up. She agreed. She had just gotten out of work, so it took her about 20 minutes to get there. But when she did, she walked into the library, and then we were both able to leave. When we got near the doors, the man kind of walked away. After leaving, my mom called the library and reported the whole thing. They were very quickly able to find out who the man was. The police even got involved, and the man ended up getting banned from that library. So, I was able to go back not too long after, and I never saw him again. thankfully. I've always loved libraries, their quiet atmosphere, the smell of old books, and the chance to dive into a world of fantasy always drew me in. So, when I got a job as a librarian at an old library on the outskirts of our town in the USA, I was over the moon. But my joy quickly turned to fear when I realized this library harbored eerie secrets. My name is Carrick, and this story happened to me last fall. I was a new employee at the library, which was built at the beginning of the 20th century. It was huge, with high ceilings and walls covered with shelves of books. Most of them were old, with yellowed pages and worn covers, but that didn't scare me. On the contrary, I was captivated by the atmosphere. The first few weeks were ordinary. I helped visitors find the books they needed, organized new arrivals, and occasionally conducted tours for school children. But one evening, when I stayed at work later than usual, something strange happened. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening, and I was about to lock up the library when I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a quiet whisper coming from the far end of the library. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I got closer, I realized they were voices. They were talking to each other, but I couldn't understand a word. I followed the sound and found it was coming from the section of old books that no one had touched for years. This part of the library was darker and colder than the rest. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and began to examine the shelves. The books were covered in dust, and at first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But when I touched one of the books, the whispering suddenly stopped. A chill ran down my spine. It felt as if someone or something was watching me. I decided it was just my imagination and went back to work. But the next day, it got even stranger. When I arrived at work, I saw that the books on the shelves had been rearranged. None of my colleagues could have done it, as I was the last one to leave the library yesterday. Days passed, and the situation only worsened. Every evening I heard the same whispering, and every morning I found books out of place. I started losing sleep and felt constantly exhausted. My colleagues began to notice my unhealthy appearance, but I couldn't tell them the truth, fearing they would think I was crazy. One evening, when I again stayed late at work, I decided to solve this mystery. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I returned to that section of the library. I started recording everything, hoping to catch something on video. The whispering was louder than before, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up in fear. Suddenly, I saw it. A shadow darted between the shelves. I began to chase it, but it disappeared. I checked the camera recording, but it only showed an empty space. Then I noticed one book sticking out from the shelf more than the others. I pulled it out, and a hidden passage opened before my eyes. It led to an old room that seemed to have been abandoned for many years. The room was cold, and the air was thick with dust. On the table lay old records and diaries. I began to read them and discovered the horrifying truth. This library was built on the site of an old cemetery. During construction, workers found ancient graves, but instead of reporting it to the authorities, they just walled them up. The souls of those buried here were angry and could not find peace. They tried to communicate with the living through the books, leaving messages and moving them. I realized they wanted only one thing: peace. I decided to help them and the next day contacted the city authorities. After lengthy negotiations, they agreed to exhume and move the remains to another location. Once this was done, the whispering stopped. The library became quiet, and I felt the fear gradually dissipate. But I will always remember that eerie whispering and those shadows that haunted me at night. Every time I pass by that old section, I feel a shiver down my spine, reminding me of the echoes of the past that have now found their peace.